So I'm back, everybody, reporting here from the Gulag, and a lot's happened since I last posted on this channel, and a lot's been going on since, well, the presidential election when I last did a live stream. And I know this isn't a live stream of sorts, but I figured I'd give a quick overview of what's happened, both in the mainstream and here within my own life, and that's going to kind of naturally segue into what's coming up, because we do have some cool things that are going to be happening on this channel in the very near future. So I'm going to try to make this around a 10 or 12 minutes or so video, just because it really doesn't need to be all that long, but there's some cool things that I think you guys might be interested in, and I kind of need to have a conversation about what to do moving forward. So the story of what's happened over the last 2 weeks actually started 12 months ago, because this story begins with 12 months of riots, which were covered for by one side of the political aisle. And when I say riots, I mean widespread destruction of property, murder, extreme violence, and yes, the storming of federal property. Yes, a federal courthouse is federal property, and there's a reason the National Guard was called in to protect that property, and that was because rioters had already planned on destroying the building. And I say rioters because Antifa doesn't actually exist, it's just an idea. Never mind the fact that these people called themselves members of Antifa, never mind the fact that there's actual people involved with Antifa. Never mind that there is actual violence and rioting involved with Antifa. But no, we got 12 months of covering for that violence, to the point of, during debates, Joe Biden says these people, for all intents and purposes, don't exist. There isn't a thing called Antifa, it's just an idea. And then on January 6th, we got one genuine from the right wing riot. And yes, folks, it was a riot. We also got condemnation from everyone of the riot that happened at the Capitol building. And in the immediate aftermath, the response was, of course, condemnation on both sides, because yes, if we're going to have that impossible standard, link is in this video's description as to what I mean by an impossible standard, did a video on that, then yes, I will condemn it in this video. The violence and rioting that happened on January 6th is something I condemn. And it's something that everyone has condemned. The other thing we've gotten in the immediate aftermath is crocodile tears from the left. Because no, it is not a whataboutism to say that when you have 12 months of widespread, incredibly violent action from rioters from the left wing, who are undoubtedly from the left wing, and we get more than 20 people dead. Does anybody want to mention David Doran's name? Should we say his name? When every news media outlet covered for that, when senators, including our presumptive vice president, ran GoFundMes to pay the bail and legal fees for these people who were caught in the act, carrying on this violence, when they spent 12 months covering for that, it is not a whataboutism to say that your crocodile tears are just that, and that your outrage is obvious bullshit. It isn't a whataboutism to call out blatant hypocrisy when it's glaring us in the face with a red neon sign pointing at it. And by the way, folks, you probably noticed that this channel has dipped more into a philosophical tone rather than an overtly political tone, and there was a reason for that. I put out a video saying that I don't know what the direction of this channel is moving forward, but we may have a major pivot to make here in terms of the type of content I'm putting out. So yes, I'm hopefully going to be having a video out in the near future. Again, this is just, remember, we're doing this video to let you guys know what's coming up. I'm probably going to be doing a video in the very near future about whataboutism, what it is and what it isn't, and where it's useful to actually call it out and why it's such a bad thing. And in addition to the crocodile tears we got from the left, we got the Gulag treatment from the left as well. And it starts with, yes, Facebook yeeting millions, if not what it looks like now is going to be more like tens of millions of accounts for not violating their terms of service and not violating their community guidelines with a brand new type of 30-day ban. Yes, the 30-day bans existed previously, but this is a new type, and its extent is really scary. So I'll put a link in this video's description to an article that the Liberty Block actually asked me to help them collaborate with, that I helped them write. It's closing in on 1,000 views on the site itself, so this is something we're actually really proud of, and it's gotten a lot of traction. So I encourage everybody to go out and look at that and read that article, and so you can get a better picture of exactly what happened in the midst of, because we wrote that basically as the news was breaking. This new ban isn't just a ban on the user themselves. It's a complete ban on any use of the platform whatsoever, which, by the way, no, we're no longer calling Facebook a platform. We're no longer calling Facebook users of a platform. We are now referring to the publication known as Facebook and the quote-unquote users as contributing authors to a publication, because that's blatantly what it is. So this new ban is a network level IP ban. And this is how I know that it's a network level IP ban. You guys see my office? I've got Wi-Fi and I've got hardline internet connection. And above me is another office, is another room where somebody else has their own network. And I invited that person to come down and test out Facebook on my network. This is a person who has a ghost Facebook account. And when I say a ghost Facebook account, I mean he uses it for third-party authentication purposes, and that's it. No posts ever, no pictures ever. It's a hidden and private account. He's never interacted on it. No likes, no shares, no emojis, nothing. There's nothing on this account other than a link basically to a behind-the-scenes connection to his email in case he ever needs to sign on some website and they need some other login information to ensure that he's a real person, right? So you provide your email account and the login information through your email account, and then you also do it through Facebook, or in case he goes onto some other network where he has the option to sign on to Facebook. So this is a ghost account. He was upstairs. I asked him to test out his account to see if it was still working. It was still working. He came downstairs to my network, connected to my network, and then got the ban. So we know that this is a network level IP ban. The other thing we know is that there's a whole lot of things that you're no longer allowed to do with it. And there's some things that you were previously allowed to do with it with 30-day bans that you aren't now. We, as part of our research, we talked to somebody who was already on a 30-day ban. And on that day, on January 6th, when Facebook at 8:30 p.m. issued this blanket ban, and the thing is we have timestamps from people, and they're all basically exactly the same time on January 6th, so we know it was a blanket ban. He was using Facebook Messenger to communicate with people on that 30-day ban, which again, since the only way he can use Facebook is through Messenger, right? The only way he couldn't possibly have violated the community guidelines or the terms of service in terms of the standard use of the publication known as Facebook, and yet he was added to that list of bans. So he got a 30-day ban while he was already in Facebook jail for not violating the terms of service of community guidelines. And then when the new 30-day ban came along, he wasn't able to use Messenger. So here are the scary things that I'm not able to do even now on my business account. Because remember, this is a network level IP ban, which means that my business account, which I built through a ghost account through a burner account on Google, and that's through a burner account on Facebook. I built that through that. Okay. Because it's a network level IP ban, my business account, which is not even politically neutral, it's apolitical, wholly apolitical, was yeeted. And now on my business account, I can't respond to messages, which means that on my message response time is going to go down, and my rating is going to go down on Facebook. So my page is going to show up less often in your feed, and I'm going to be deranked, if you will. I can't cancel ads, so thank God I didn't have any going at the moment. But if I did, I couldn't even cancel them, which means that they would continue to charge me for a service I have no control over whatsoever. I can't report abuse. I can't report spam on my business account. I can't appoint a new administrator to the account, right? Because I tested out with my mother, who didn't get the ban. I tried to make her administrator, and there's no way to do that now. You can't, of course, appeal the ban. The scary thing is I can't even delete my business page on Facebook. So, I imagine there's going to be some grounds for a lawsuit when business pages that have ads running can't delay the ads, can't cancel the ads, can't readjust, the time frame, or put them off in any way. So that's what's happened on Facebook, and that's kind of the news from my business. I'm suspicious that this has led to one of the contract cancellations that I had, but I can't really tie that to that. If you guys want to know what I do for a living, let me know in the comment section. Maybe that's something I can bring up, because it might actually help you guys out there, because what I do, I own a media production company. And so maybe you guys out there and on the other side of the camera, if you will, are interested in some of the services I might be able to offer. So I'll let you guys know if you guys want to get that from me. Now, the only thing is that I wasn't the only person yeeted on Facebook. I mentioned that Facebook yeeted what looks now to be like tens of millions of accounts over nakedly partisan politics. Twitter, in the meantime, yeeted the president, and Twitter yeeted the president for a video in which he openly condemned the riots and told everybody to go home, which seems pretty bizarre to me. Remember how we had the impossible standard where somebody demands that you do a thing and you do the thing and it's not good enough, so we're going to delete you anyways? Do you remember the witches test where it's kind of like a Kafka trap? Again, we did these videos before, so I'll put those videos in as a link in this video's description. The president of the United States had his account yeeted from Twitter and has since been permabanned from Twitter, which is interesting because the Supreme Court ruled that the president of the United States couldn't prevent the common citizen because of FOIA from viewing his account. He couldn't block users on Twitter, which is interesting because Jack Dorsey can, but the president of the United States on his own account can't. So that does kind of raise a legal quandary. If it's the official account, if it's the official basically press release, if it's the official poster board for the release of public information as ruled by the Supreme Court, and as such is a place that everyone must be guaranteed access to, and then Jack Dorsey prevents anyone from having access to that, is that even legal? Well, it's going to be basically a moot point come Wednesday, but we will have a lawyer on during this week. I'm not going to say exactly when, and we're going to be able to ask him some serious legal questions, and that's one of the topics that we're going to discuss. Is it even legal for Twitter to do that based on the Supreme Court ruling previously? And the answer may be yes. I don't honestly know, but it seems awfully bizarre. So what happened was that there were all of these people that were getting yeeted off of Facebook and Twitter, and they said, form your own social media, create an alternative social media of your own. Well, we did that. It was called Parler, and Parler, in the meantime, rose through the ranks as hundreds of thousands of accounts are being yeeted from Twitter and millions from Facebook, and became the #1 rated app on both the Google and Apple stores. And then that got yeeted because Amazon Web Services decided in a blatantly collusive anti-competitive behavior. And I use that phrase because, yes, there is a legal question to be asked here about what's going on behind the scenes, because let's not be naive. We know what's going on behind the scenes. We have everyone at Twitter and Facebook and YouTube. We have the whole of Silicon Valley on tape on multiple occasions saying that they have these conversations behind closed doors and that they are all just in bed with the DNC, and that they are, for all intents and purposes, nothing more than an extension of the propaganda wing of the DNC. So Parler was told, hey, listen, there's this activity going on Parler, so goodbye. The thing is that activity, we know, was going on through other channels. And because of how big Parler was compared to how big something like Facebook was, there were reports saying now, and I'll have to put links to those in this video's description, I suppose, because I am making a pretty empirical claim here, that suggests that if Facebook had been yeeted instead of Parler, it's entirely plausible that these attacks never would have happened. Yet if Parler were deleted, then that they still would have gone on, because the organization of even these attacks, or this most recent riot, was much more through Facebook than through Parler. Of course, as you know, if anyone who's actually used Parler doesn't really do a good job of connecting people with other people. It doesn't do a good job of things like creation of groups. There's no way to create groups on Parler. And the sharing within that platform is, because it is actually a platform, was kind of difficult to do. And it's part of why I never really got into Parler, because it's just not that great of a sounding board. But, and of course, perfect line with the leftist tradition, Amazon didn't like them over nakedly political reasons, and beyond the Google Play Store yanking them, despite them being #1, and beyond the Apple Play Store yanking them because despite them being number one, Amazon Web Services pulled their hosting. And there's no way that this is in any way in line with competitive behavior. This screams Sherman antitrust in terms of collusive anti-competitive behavior. And there's a reason I phrase it that way. And again, like I said, we will have an attorney on so we can discuss that. So we started getting the gulags from the left, and it didn't really get any better than that. So on January 9th, Scott Adams tweeted, "How long will Republicans be allowed to do banking? Because if you're going to take their and I'll have to do another philosophical video on taking things to their logical end. It isn't a slippery slope fallacy. It's just taking a principle or a philosophy to its logical end to say something along the lines of, how long will Republicans be allowed to do banking? Because if you're going to get yeeted from web hosting over nakedly partisan political reasons, if you're going to be told, build your own, build your own web hosting services, build your own servers, have your alternative server farms, then why not take that to its logical end, which goes to banking? Build your own banks, build your own credit system, build your own currency system. Scott Adams, how long will Republicans be allowed to do banking? This is January 9th. Same day, the response from Christina Nevich was, it's a very short leap from, quote, allowing you to speak incites violence and white supremacy, end quote, to, quote, allowing you to bank funds violence and white supremacy, end quote. And 3 days later, this comes to fruition when, according to Reuters, Deutsche Bank will no longer do business with Trump. This is not a small deal here. Deutsche Bank is the largest lender to Trump and his business in the world, and by a lot. And Trump's business is not just some pissant landscaping business. This is a multinational, multi-billion-dollar firm that has assets that are. I believe that Trump's business is still in the Fortune 400. It's a gigantic company, and they go into debt a ton because what they do is they buy and sell and lease property. And when you do that, in order to finance the larger projects, you're not going to have the liquid assets to do that. You're almost always going into lending. And Deutsche Bank was the one that was providing the overwhelming majority of, not the overwhelming majority, was the largest lender and the largest creditor to Trump's business in the world, and by a huge distance. So we're getting kind of into this scary world of, okay, well, if we're going to be told we're going to have to find alternative everything, well, let's take that to its logical end. And you'd think that there would be, okay, hold on, before you take it to its logical end, maybe we've gone too far. Nope. The calls from the left aren't to say, hey, wait a minute, you guys, maybe it's a bad idea to silence these voices. Nope. The left is openly praising this. So, the other thing that we got in the midst of all of this was a disturbingly fascistic rant from AOC calling for the ouster and arrest of sitting opposition senators for voting. That's right. I disagree with Ted Cruz's decision to vote the way he did when it came to certifying the electoral votes. I disagree with it, but that's part of what's called the democratic process when you vote. So what do we call a group that fundamentally disagrees with freedom of speech, that only wants one party to rule them all? What do we call it when one party says, the political opposition must be ousted and arrested? I hate to engage in reductio ad Hitlerium here, but it seems that the DNC has fully embraced the most cartoonishly extreme radicals within their ranks. We are on to the realm now of promoting, to fully engaging, being eaten alive by the straw men within their ranks. Right? The people who are openly saying that, yes, it is a good thing that free speech is silenced and curtailed so that only one side of the aisle is allowed to even be heard. And if it sound, and again, I hate to engage in reductio ad Hitlerium, but the DNC has become the party of Ein Volk, Ein Reich, Ein Führer. So I know a lot of people are going to say something along the lines of, so, okay, what do we do now? Because anyone who knows me knows that I'm not a big fan of complaining without providing solutions. And there's really two solutions moving forward. The first one is one that most people on the right don't even want to engage in and historically have not engaged in. We can continue filing the lawsuits, like the lawsuit that Parler has filed against Amazon Web Services. Again, we'll be talking about that later in this week when we bring on our attorney guest host. Or instead of continuing to play the short game, we engage in what the left did, in which was to play in the long game. Now, I have another channel on YouTube. It's called Mike Reads. I'll link to it in this video's description. I've done a lot of reading for that channel. Two of the books I've read for that channel, one I'm about 20 pages away out of 600 from finishing, so I won't get into that book too much. But I've already done a review of F.A. Hayek's The Road to Serfdom. And in that book, there's basically an outline of exactly what happened in the lead up to World War II and in the immediate aftermath. And the short version is that we actually had a full-on communist, admitted communist, signed on by the Socialist Workers' Party here in the United States. It was in the 1920 election. His name was Robert La Follette, and he was unabashedly communist. This is Bernie Sanders if he were to take off the veil, the cloak, the thin cloak, the thin veil that is the thing that is separating him from being Chairman Mao. That movement took hold in the infancy of the 20th century. Well, then what happened? Well, then we had the Holodomor, which was where millions and millions and millions of Russians were, for all intents and purposes, genocided by the Soviet Union. And then we had this thing called World War II. And in the aftermath of World War II, and in the immediate aftermath of World War II, here in the United States, these open communists kind of were ostracized. And it was kind of made clear that this is not a good ideology. And we kind of knew that by the early 1940s. And it really came to the fore by the late 1940s. So these movements basically had to go underground. So what did they have to do in order to continue to survive and to get their ideas, their fundamental worldviews, which were wholly antithetical to any hint of a Jeffersonian vision of government and of a decent society? They went underground, and what they had to do was, and this is something Yuri Bezmenov has talked about, engage in subversion. And that means that what they're going to do is they're going to create these movements that, that they lead, and we're, for all intents and purposes, we'll call them puppet charities. So these are charities and volunteer groups that are like the Volunteers of America, right? They have these wonderful sounding names, and their quote unquote mission is to end poverty or to bring an end to starvation in the United States or something along those lines. And you get people to volunteer for these charities, if you will, to these nonprofits. And you use these nonprofits to instill a value system that is not in line with the fundamental value system upon which all of the English philosophy that led to the creation of our country was based. And then these people become martyrs as they get outed by things like the McCarthy trials, which, yes, they were probably a bad thing. And yes, the federal government probably shouldn't be engaging in this. But these nonprofits were clearly just shells, clearly just a facade for the communism that they were looking to purvey. And it was it wasn't. It is now obvious in hindsight that was what they were doing. Fast track, we get into the 1960s, we get some of these policies implemented. They start, these people that were part of these volunteer groups bring their kids start growing up, the kids that grow up then start purveying these ideas in a more intellectual setting, like the classroom or the college scene. And then once you get through a few generations of these people, the few iterations of these people completely overtaking things like Hollywood, the mainstream media, and institutions like education, which has become a complete indoctrination camp and has become the indoctrination wing, the Hitler Youth, if you will, of the DNC. you wind up winning the long game. And yes, you're going to have to use what Yuri Bezmenov talked about, subversion. You're going to have to create new words, create new phrases that don't mean what they literally say. So in the case of something like social justice is not just. And that's why, and that's what we mean. You take a word like justice and you deliberately bastardize it because people will fall for these bastardizations. You take gender and you deliberately bastardize it to mean something it has never meant in the 1,000-year history of the English language. In fact, it's a little bit more than 1,000 years, but for all intents and purposes, it's the 500 to 1,500-year history of what we would consider in the English language. Completely bastardize basic elements of these language, and you wind up convincing people that these things mean things that they don't actually mean. And by doing that, you wind up controlling the thought narrative of an entire society. And that's what I mean by the long game. So if we were to do that on the right, there's a lot of ways to go about that. And I wouldn't start with exactly the volunteer and charity and community organizations that the left started with in the late 1940s. There are better ways for the right to engage in something like this. And I think that that's one way to win back the culture war, if you will. Ben Shapiro's idea to play the short game and just have an alternative media source, if you will, is playing the short game. That's not going to make fundamental change at a societal level of the kind that's needed, like what happened in the left. Adults aren't going to change their mind on politics. Kids might, but in order to get these kids to think this way, we have to effectively institutionalize them. And if that's what the left did, the only way that we're going to win back that institution is by playing the long game, like I've suggested. And, guys, put down in the comment section if you want to hear that out, because there actually is a plan to engage in that. And I could spell it out if you'd like. It's not something that's being purveyed as far as I can tell, but I could spell it out, how you would go about engaging in the long game. The problem with the long game is that it takes a long time. This is something that's going to be 70 to 80 years of misery, if not more. And it means you're going to have to just shut up and accept misery again for 70 to 80 years or more in order for it to completely unfold the way it has from the left wing. And by the way, I'm actually seeing this in my hometown in smaller scale right now. There is a deliberate effort from the left to destroy the RTC from within their own ranks through these subversion techniques, through the creation of these shell 501c3s, through their purveyance of ideas that are spread through highly, how would I say this? Communities that are extremely regulated. These are communities where supposedly they are built around the notion of free speech and open dialogue, where they are built around somebody claiming to be of the right wing, administering these communities, who is obviously not of the right wing, and there's claims that they are plants from the left. They might be, based on how I've seen certain people act as of late. So we're seeing it in real time in my community on the small scale, so it absolutely does work. But again, the long game takes a long time, and it means there's going to be a lot of suck involved in this. As in, life is going to suck for a really long time. There are a lot of elements of life that are going to suck for a really long time. But there's an alternative to that. And I think we've kind of alluded to it in this conversation tonight, in that if you're going to just build an alternative to its logical end. By the way, Rosa Parks should have built her own bus line. And maybe, if we want to say build your own, maybe that gay couple in Masterpiece Cake Shop should have built their own cake shop. Or maybe, hey, it's a private business. They get to do whatever they want. Jack Dorsey only has to serve whatever clientele he wants. So wait, why can't the people in the Masterpiece Cake Shop serve whatever clientele they want? Yeah. So we've got a disconnect there here. But if we're going to take that logic, if we're going to take them at their word and to their logical extent, that means forming your own alternative government. Now, I had a debate with my friend Elliot Axman at the Liberty Block. Check them out at libertyblock.com. I'll put a link to them in this video's description too. I won't put a link to where that video is because it's on a publication that I can no longer support. But that debate was over secession, and I was not on the side of secession. And now I'm kind of getting one over because the cost of unilateral secession at this point, yes, I agree with my previous take on this, it's going to be enormous. It's entirely plausible that if New Hampshire secedes or if Kristi Noem in North Dakota secedes, it's entirely plausible that D.C., which is now one-party rule, now that we're under one-party rule, it's entirely plausible they see that as an act of war and send in troops. And that's going to mean a tremendous loss of life. And by the way, I do fully agree that if one state does it, you're going to see in a matter of weeks, dozens of states do it, which means we're going to get a full-on civil war if that's the case, in my opinion. I think there's a huge risk of that. And if we get that civil war, it's going to be a tremendous loss of life. However, from a practical standpoint, from a pragmatic standpoint, is 5 to 6 or even 10 years of civil war is that cost in terms of loss of life and other costs, if it winds up resulting if it winds up resulting in a more free state, in a more liberty-based state, and a more liberal society in the classical sense, is it then worth it? When you compare that to 70 to 80 plus years of one party, one rule, of ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer. At this point, I'm just about on that side. I might have changed my mind when it comes to a pragmatic and practical view of secession. So, on that note, next Sunday night, we are going to have the leader of the Free Cal movement. It's a California-based secessionist movement that's coming from the left wing. And my take at this point is the appropriate thing for DC to do if Governor Newsom drafts secession papers is to let them go. We don't need to drag out a war. If California wants to go, let them leave. If Kristi Noem wants to leave, let her leave. That's, I think, the only reasonable way to go through things. So, we've talked about a bunch of things that are going to be happening on this channel. My business actually has some big news that might be coming up in the next week or so, depending on how the contracts work out. So I may have to update everybody on that because it's just exciting news for me, and I like sharing exciting news for me. But also, we are going to have, on this week, guests on this channel. We're going to have our attorney. So if you guys have legal questions, constitution-based questions, I'll get that information out as soon as I can, so get those questions ready. If you have questions for Marcus Ruiz, who is coming on again on Sunday night, more details to come in a moment, get those questions ready because he's coming on to join us. And we're going to have a civil conversation about secession here in the United States and the appropriate time and place, specifically in regards to California. So again, I'll get some more information now as that comes. So it's going to be a really eventful week, as it's been a very eventful few weeks on this channel. I know I haven't posted in a while, but yeah, my life has been very eventful, and that's why I haven't been posting as much. There's a lot of news coming on. I'll be moving out of this office hopefully in the next few weeks, and that's kind of been taken up a lot of my time. I've had a lot of work come my way outside of this channel, but yeah, that's what we can look forward to. And I really don't think this is going to wind up being 10 to 12 minutes like I initially intended. But thanks for sticking with me anyways, and we will see you in the next one. Good night, folks.